Ladra was the first man to die in Ireland. Some say he died of an excess of women. Others that an oar shaft pierced his buttock when he died of that wound. When Ladra... Celtic mythology, where do you begin? How do you keep all those names straight? And how do you pronounce them? So here you are, trying to learn about Celtic mythology. You've tried looking online, but all the answers are different. It's hard to know which information is trustworthy. Maybe you bought a few books and the result hasn't been as good as you'd hoped. You didn't quite find what you were looking for, and then some know-it-all told you that your books were wrong anyway. Hang in there, help is at hand. But I'll be honest with you, Celtic mythology is a big topic. You can't learn it all from one book or one website. You can't learn it all in a month or even a year. Maybe you're past that beginner stage. You feel like you've found some good resources, but it's still hard to progress. Maybe you've spent a lot of time on one area, a particular set of stories or a deity that you're interested in, but all the names and the jargon are still confusing. You're not sure how one thing relates to another. You've been in the weeds, you've been in the trees, now you need to get organized. I've got a new class starting soon called Introduction to Celtic Mythology. Whether you're an absolute beginner or someone who's been exploring for a while, this should give you a good foundation to build on. My aim is to give people a clear understanding of what Celtic myth actually is, where it comes from, and a good, solid overview of all the ingredients. This is a 12-week course. About half of it is dedicated to material from Wales and half to Ireland. Part of what I'll be teaching is how the different stories and groups of stories are usually organized, so that things are less of a jumble for you. Then we'll learn about what's in some of the most famous or most important stories, who some of the main characters are, and what the story is about. I'll also make sure that you're building up skills so that when the class ends, you're well equipped to do your own further research. Every week, I'll be featuring a book and a website that I find useful, including some tricks for finding what you're actually looking for on the internet. I always send out a PDF of notes after my classes, and you can expect them to be full of useful links. That will include links for further reading or videos, and links to where you can find proper translations of most of the stories. And speaking of stories, I know people want stories. It's why we like mythology, after all. So there will be a bit of storytelling every week, and of course you'll get a link to where you can read the original text that it came from. This will be a lot to pack into the course, but I will make sure that there's time set aside every week to answer your questions. You don't need any prior knowledge of Celtic myth or Celtic languages for this class. I'll start with the most basic basics, and we'll build from there. By the end, I think you'll be surprised at how much you've learned, and you should have a nice, clear understanding of things. There's more information at the link below this video. Welcome to our final day of the 12 Days of Celtic Mythology Season 4. Some of you may have felt that I've left something out of the exploration of the salmon. The truth is, I've left out a great deal. For one thing, there is the salmon of knowledge who lives in Nechtan's well, or Conlo's well, which may be the same well, or might be two very similar wells. Conlo's well, which is under the sea, at which are the hazels and inspirations of wisdom, that is, the hazels of the science of poetry. And in the same hour their fruit and their blossom and their foliage break forth, and these fall on the well in the same shower, which raises on the water a royal surge of purple. Then the salmon chew the fruit, and the juice of the nuts is apparent on their purple bellies, and 7 streams of wisdom spring forth and turn there again. I really think that bit about the hazels of the science of poetry is worth noticing. So this is a very typical description of Conlo's well. In another text, it only has 5 streams, and it seems to be in Manannán's otherworld, but not necessarily under the sea. This is from Cormac's Adventures in the Otherworld. Then he sees in the garth, that is in the courtyard, a shining fountain with 5 streams flowing out of it, and the hosts in turn a drinking its water. 9 hazels of Buan, in other words Boan, the goddess of the river Boyne, 9 hazels of Buan grow over the well. The purple hazels drop their nuts into the fountain, and the 5 salmons which are in the fountain sever them and send their husks floating down the streams. Now the sound of the falling of those streams is more melodious than any music that men sing. Then Cormac gets to talking to Manannán, and Manannán explains what he has just seen. The fountain which thou sawest, this is Manannán speaking, the fountain which thou sawest with the 5 streams out of it is the fountain of knowledge, and the streams are the 5 senses through which knowledge is obtained. Nectan's well is said to be the source of the river Boyne, but you might be thinking of another shape-shifting salmon from Irish lore. So let me tell you a little story. Kesser, the daughter of Bith, the son of Noah, was the first person who came to Ireland 40 days before the flood. A prophet appeared to Noah. "Make an ark," he said, "for a flood is coming. Take your wife, your sons, and their wives into the ark and save yourselves." But Noah refused to save his son Bith, saying that he was sinful. Noah said to Bith, "Go to the western edge of the world. The flood might not reach you there." Bith's daughter Kesser said, "Give the leadership to me, and I will tell you what we must do." They agreed to that, and Kesser directed them to forsake Noah's God and make an idol instead. The advice they had from that idol was to make a sea voyage, but the idol was unable to tell them when the flood would come. Kesser thought that if she could find a place where people had never lived, where sin had never yet been committed, that it might be spared from the flood. Her wizards told her that Ireland was such a place. So on Tuesday, the 15th, Kesser left the island of Meroe on the river Nile. 10 years she was in Egypt, then 20 days on the Caspian Sea, and thence 12 days on the Cimmerian Sea. She was 1 day in Asia Minor and sailed 20 days to the Alpine mountain. From there she sailed for 9 days until she reached Spain. 9 days she voyaged again, and on the 5th day of the month, on a Saturday, she landed in Ireland. Kesser began her voyage with 3 ships. 2 were wrecked, but Kesser and her crew survived. Altogether there were 50 women, but just 3 men. Bith, son of Noah, Ladra, the pilot of the ship, and Fintán, son of Lavrid, known as Fintán mac Bocra, after his mother. These men divided the 50 women among them, as Fintán tells us. Fintán took Kesser as one of his 17 women. Bith took 17, including Barand, and Ladra took Banva as one of his 16, and he was unhappy because he had less women than the others. Ladra was the first man to die in Ireland. They say he died of an excess of women. Other than that, he may have died by an oar shaft which pierced his buttock, and he died of the wound. I don't know if that was due to one of the wives. Beats me. When Ladra died, his women came to Kesser asking what they should do, and it was decided that Bith and Fintán would each take 8 of the women. With 25 women, Bith went to the mountains in the north of Ireland, and he died there. And the women buried Bith in the mountains and returned to Kesser and Fintán again. When Fintán saw the women approaching, he ran away and came to a loch. And then Kesser took her women to Connacht, and 7 days before the flood, she died there of a broken heart at the loss of Fintán, her husband, and the death of her father Bith. And all of Kesser's people were lost in the flood, save Fintán, who hid himself in a cave and was kept alive by God. Well, that was quite a story. Who knows where it came from, but it became part of the attempt to tell the history of Ireland, which was rich in its own mythology, and to somehow reconcile that mythology to the events in the book of Genesis. If you read the book of Invasions carefully, you'll see that it's as if much of the story it contains is being told by Fintán mac Bocra, the man put into the water by God as a salmon. This excerpt from a poem in the Book of Invasions takes up the story. Flood overtook Bith in his mountain, it is no secret, Ladra in Ard Ladrand, Kesser in her nook. But as for me, this is Fintán speaking, as for me he buried me, the Son of God, above the company, he snatched the flood from me above heavy Tuoltunya. I had a year under the flood in strong Tuoltunya. I found nothing for my sustenance, and unbroken sleep were best. I was in Ireland here, my journey was everlasting, till Partholon reached her from the east, from the land of the Greeks. I was here in Ireland, and Ireland was desert, till the sons of Agnaman reached, I assume there's a bit of unreadable manuscript there, Nevid, brilliant his fashion. The Firbolg and the Firgalian came, it was long ago. The Firdovnan came, they landed on a headland in the west. Thereafter the Tuatha came in their masses of fog, so that there was sustenance for me, though it was a long lifetime. The sons of Mil came from Spain, from the south, so that there was sustenance for me at their hands, though they were strong in battle. A long life fell to my lot, I shall not conceal it, till faith overtook me from the King of Heaven of the clouds. I am Fintán, the white son of Bachra. I shall not conceal it. After the flood, here I am, a noble, great sage. Fintán has several animal lives, a bit like Tuan Macarel, but not quite as clearly described. I'll get to those. But I want to look at an exploration of Fintán's name and what it says about his identity. This is from a paper by Grigory Bondarenko, a Russian scholar who's been at Queen's University in Belfast for quite a number of years. So K. Meyer is Kuno Meyer, whom you may remember as the translator of The Voyage of Bran. Kuno Meyer suggested that the name Fintán is derived from Common Celtic. So this is a reconstructed word, we know that from the asterisk, Vindoshenos. And then the next bit's in German, since Kuno Meyer was German, but it means white-haired and old. And O'Rahilly, another great Celtic scholar of yesteryear, calls him the White Ancient. Fintán's old age, that is Shenos, semantically corresponds to his function as the oldest man in Ireland. This etymology is widely accepted by Celtic scholars. The white color of Fintán's name has strong associations with the priestly, sacred class in many Indo-European traditions and is associated with Druids and Felis names in Irish material. Moreover, the color has certain associations with vision and knowledge, as the common Celtic nominal base vindo, white, derives from the Indo-European root, I don't know how you're supposed to say that, hued, to see clearly or to know. So there's a sense here of knowledge as the light which brings understanding, or of something which becomes translucent to the special, wise individual, but remains opaque to the rest of us. Fintán, who lives through all the ages of Ireland, features prominently in a story about the birth of a famous king called Conn of the 100 Battles. In this one, he's compared to the biblical prophet Samuel and said to receive knowledge via a sacred sunbeam, among other things. Bondarenko discusses this at length, but he notes something curious, which is going to take us to Gaul and to a discussion of the Celtic deity Ogmios, so hang on tight. Fintán received 7 chains on his tongue. There are several striking features here that remind us of Lucian's description, and not only the chains. So he's talking here about a scenario in which Lucian of Samosata sees a strange painting of which turns out to be of Ogmios, and he discusses it with a Celtic bystander. So Lucian starts with a Celtic name for Heracles, Ogmios, and describes his appearance on a certain painting, which would be quite unusual for a Celtic image. He is extremely old, bald-headed, except for a few lingering hairs, which are quite grey. Then follows a description of golden and amber chains attached to the tip of his tongue, that's the tongue of Ogmios. It is with these chains that Ogmios drags a great crowd of men who are all tethered by the ears. Somehow, unnaturally, a Celt at Lucian's elbow explains to him the meaning of the image. Ogmios, he says, is represented as an old man for eloquence and eloquence alone is wont to show its full vigor in old age. So the reason Heracles is in here is because this figure of Ogmios is dressed sort of like Heracles. He has a lion skin and a club and so on. It's also made clear that the people who follow Ogmios, although he's written here, drags a great crowd, they're following him very willingly, very joyfully. At the same time, the image of eloquence connected with chains and old age seems to be relevant to Fintán's description. Think about it, the white hair, the old age. One, of course, cannot equate Fintán with Gaulish Ogmios or Irish Ogma, given that the theonyms have different linguistic and mythological background. On the one hand, Fintán might have acquired here some features of a different mythological character. On the other, as a primordial man, he has to show features of a cultural hero, as a man first in eloquence and persuasion, although we are not sure whether Fintán's chains were tied to any human beings, going back to the idea that Fintán was given 7 chains. So still exploring the stuff about the birth of Conn, the author writes, the Stowe version of the Táin, so we've taken a wild turning here, the Stowe version of the Táin preserved a remarkable passage describing a black-haired man with chains from the troop of the Alad. A black, swift man is in front of the host. There are 7 chains around his neck, and 7 men at the end of each chain. He drags those 7 men 7 times, so that their noses strike the earth, and they make reproaches to them, and he stops. Eircen, son of the 3 Hospitaliers, is the man with the chains. This character possesses certain qualities similar to Ogmios or Heracles, such as his black color, chains attached to him, and his strength. At the same time, the black man has 7 chains around his neck and is surrounded by 7s, in a manner recalling Fintán. Eircen might be seen as a figure comprising features of both Ogmios and Fintán, as a necessary bridge between them, supporting Ogmios' relevance in the analysis of the Fintán material. As Bondarenko hints, this seems to suggest that Fintán mac Bocra may be tied to much earlier concepts of deities or heroes connected to concepts such as knowledge and poetic ability in ways which we can hardly fathom. This raises some deep questions about how Ireland ended up with a salmon of knowledge and the whole. I know I asked you about this already, but once you've finished watching this video, today's question is this, to ask you again to expound your own ideas about this, with special attention to the stories and scholarship we've looked at in this series, especially maybe what we've looked at today, and by all means, comment on each other's ideas. In 1932, the great Eleanor Hull wrote a paper which draws on many of the stories we've looked at in this 12-day series. If you love this series, you would probably enjoy reading the paper. Hull begins by looking at stories of the oldest animals via the quite ancient fascination with that question. Here, she mentions a 4th century story from India, as well as quoting the Greek writer Hesiod, which takes us back to around 700 BC. One of the oldest forms is found in the Buddha birth stories, or Jataka, and as it belongs to one of the most ancient portions, it must be at least as old as the 4th century. And then the Hesiod quote, "Thus the croaking cormorant, or sea crow, lives 9 generations of aging men. The stag 4 times the cormorant. The crow outlives 3 stags, but the phoenix 9 crows. And we, the fair-haired nymphs, daughter of Aegis-bearing Zeus, outlive 10 phoenixes." So that must be the nymphs who are speaking here. And you find phoenixes in quite a few of these early who's the oldest animal or the ages of the animals sort of passages. Hull also takes the reader through a number of Irish examples. So this from the Book of Ballymote, we get 3 fields to a tree, 3 trees to a hound, 3 hounds to a horse, 3 horses to a human being, 3 human beings to a deer, 3 deer to a chain, 3 chains to a salmon, 3 salmons to a ewe, 3 yew trees to an age, ever-living God. So we can see that Bith in Irish can mean an age, a fitting name for a character in the story of Fintán. It's interesting that there are a couple of non-animals here, a field, a chain, and a yew tree. which makes me think of the incredible runs in the book of Taliesin, in which he speaks of experiencing so many existences, not just as animals, but as an axe or a bubble in beer or a clod of earth. But back to Eleanor Hull. She continues, a somewhat different and more modern form is found in Egerton 133, Article 20 in the British Museum. So all that algebra stuff is just the name of a manuscript. 3 dogs, a human being. 3 human beings, a deer. 3 deer, an eagle. 3 eagles, a male salmon. 3 salmon to the end of the world. Many of the confusions and changes in these runs, she writes, are due to the fact that some of the words used have 2 meanings, and it's often uncertain which the writer had in mind. Thus, eo may mean a salmon or a yew tree, and consequently, either the salmon or the yew is said to be the longest living. We can see more and more of the animals we've been encountering coming into these lists, and I don't even know whether my tiny brain is capable of taking in the implications of yew, meaning both yew, which is one of the longest living trees on earth, and meaning salmon. I'll leave you to ponder that. Hull's paper is titled The Hawk of Achill, or The Legend of the Oldest Animals. She translates long passages of the poem in her paper and gives a detailed summary of the sections in between that she doesn't fully translate. But she starts with a general summary that isn't too long. So to avoid this talk being too long, we'll settle for that. And this brings us to the poem of the Hawk of Achill, printed in Irish in 1907 from the Book of Fermoy and other manuscripts. But so far as I know, not hitherto printed in English. Of course, she's writing, in 1932. Having a printed copy of a manuscript is very new. The poem details a conversation held by Fintán with an aged hawk on the lonely island of Achill off the west coast of Mayo, in which they relate the events of their lives and the adventures and miseries that have overtaken each of them in its course. As they discover that their ages are exactly equal, and in each case they amount to the respectable length of 6,515 years, they have had time for many sorrows and many adventures. To Fintán, the greatest grief of his life has been the death of Kesser, his companion, and of his son Ilan and others who had ventured forth with them to escape the deluge, and above all, the loss of his own eye, which had been plucked out by a hawk or crow. Like Tuan, he had been in many shapes since coming to Ireland. As a salmon, he had been in all the rivers of Ireland in turn, and it was at the falls of Assaroe, on the coldest night he had ever experienced, with the ice like a blue wall above him, that a crow out of cold Achill came above him and plucked out his eye. On this, the hawk hastily intervenes. Remember, this is a conversation between Fintán and the hawk. The hawk hastily intervenes to say that it was he who robbed him of his eye, on which an angry altercation ensues, Fintán demanding eric, or compensation, for his blinded eye, and the hawk stoutly refusing it. The Falls of Assaroe, as they're called here, this is an anglicization of Es-Ryd. If you know your Macha stories, you may recognize this as the place where Macha Mangrud's father dies. It's a place with a lot of folklore attached to it. The reason I can't show you a modern photo of it is because it was drowned by a hydroelectric project in the 1940s. It doesn't exist anymore. So this is a recolored photo from a black and white one. It was a very famous salmon leap where the migrating salmon could be seen migrating upstream. I think you'll see a strong similarity between this story of Fintán the salmon losing his eye on the coldest night to the Hawk of Achill and a famous waterfall where salmon leap like the trout in the Eagle of Loch Treg story that we started with on day 1. Even the description of the wall of ice that prevented his jump has an echo of the slab of rock where the trout lost his eye. This is how you spell Es-Ryd. You can see on this map where Assaroe Es-Ryd was, just within Donegal, and I've also marked Achill Island, the supposed habitation of the hawk. It has some sea cliffs on the western side. We'll just finish up Hull's synopsis. Then Fintán takes up his story again and relates that he had been changed from a salmon into the shape of an eagle and afterward into that of a falcon. 500 years he had been a salmon, 50 years an eagle, and 100 years a falcon. Then God put him back in his own form as a man, and during many reigns of kings of Ireland, he had acted, up to the coming of Patrick, as a chief judge or brehon, and portioned out to them their territories. So once again, we see Fintán as a wise man, this time a brehon judge who has already been so many things. Gregory Bondarenko's paper is easy to find online. I'll put a link in the description. Eleanor Hull's paper is a little more difficult unless you have institutional access through a university or something, but I'll give you some leads if you don't have that, because it's a really good read. The whole poem is available online on a very fancy website, and I'll link to that too. I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching this series, and especially to the people who took up the challenge. 12 days is a lot. I will email you. And I'd also like to thank my students and patrons, especially those who came to the live sessions, so that I didn't have to film these talks just staring at a camera. I'm going to finish up with some food for thought from the Book of Taliesin. I won't put it on the screen, you can just listen, and I hope to see you soon. A second time my shape shifted, and I was a blue salmon, a hound and a stag, a roebuck on the mountain, a clod and a spade and an axe in the hand, an auger gripped in tongs for a year and a half, a speckled white cockerel for the hens in Aden, a stallion at stud, a ramping bull, a sheaf stacked for milling, meal ground for farmers. I was grain in a sieve, grain that grew on a hill. I am harvested, stored, sent off to the kiln and scattered by hand, ready for roasting. Then a hen took me in, red clawed my crested foe, and for 9 nights I rested at peace in her womb. When I had matured, I was drink for a king. I was dead and alive. A seizure shot through me. I stood on my lees. Poured off, I was perfect. A cup to encourage, stirred up by the red claws.